All right, we are on air. It is Thursday, February 14th, and this is a meeting to check in on active development tasks for Backdrop CMS. Getting started with new projects this week, we have the translation template extractor, which I think is related to all Olaf's work on the localization server, which is great. And user import, which I think is something Laren ported in the last week. So thanks to everybody who worked on those modules. I'm happy to see them coming along. Website-related development tasks, backdropcms.org, we discussed at length in the design meeting. So if you want to watch that meeting, you can see updates there. In short, the changes I've made for module things and layouts had a bug last week. So Nate's been working on helping me fix the search thing, which I will try and test today, and hopefully we'll get those done soon. And the homepage demo button is also having some issues, but we hope to get that done soon as well. Translation site. Olaf has been amazing for the past few weeks. He's been creating all of the translation strings for the various versions of Backdrop, recent versions of Backdrop, which I think is great. And I know there's a ticket assigned to me right now to set the order of versions, which I will take a look at. But yeah, I just wanted to say a quick shout out to him for all of the amazing work on getting the translation server up and running. We also have a new person who's also offered to help us maintain the French translations and perhaps help with some of the other stuff on the localization server as well. So very excited to see that moving along. All right, Nate, how about release last week update?
Yeah, so it was another eventful week in the world of product development. We released Backdrop 1.12.2, and that included a number of fixes for the 1.12 release, several around applying updates and using the project installer. So we fixed core updates failing occasionally if the type was missing in the tests.info file that was issue 1294. So that made it so that sometimes core wouldn't update itself. It would fail on validation. Also similar, all projects could not be downloaded occasionally, depending on which AWS/GitHub server you're getting connected to when using update module or the installer module. And we fixed that problem in 3488. So both of those two things taken together really drastically improved the reliability of being able to install projects through the UI and also apply module updates through the UI. Oh, and core updates. So those are all very important fixes that I was glad to see released in 1.12.2. Let's see, we also fixed a regression related to using grids in views that was switched to using CSS grid on new views, but legacy views should have continued using the table format for backwards compatibility, but that accidentally was broken. And so 3494 corrects that problem so that existing views that were using the table-based one will continue to use the table-based ones after they update. Also, RTL issues. We've been totally, as Jen would say, on fire for RTL issues. We've had an excellent contributor come in, putting Backdrop into Arabic on his site, and it filed a whole bunch of issues related to Arabic displaying oddly on various pages. And so we fixed all 5 of the ones that he had filed previously, and there was actually some in 1.12.1 as well. All 5 of those have been corrected, but then he filed another one right after we made the release. So we have to keep on top of these things. I also saw, Gregor, you filed a couple more as well.
Yeah, more coming up. It's like 5 or 6 that I discovered. I haven't filed issues for them yet.
Yeah, that's excellent. So yeah, all of those, the ones that we knew about or the ones that we had pull requests for, we merged all of those in, and they're in 1.12.2. There's a few new ones that you can find if you search for RTL in GitHub. And one in particular that is very broken is the screen for managing what buttons are placed in CKEditor's toolbar is really horribly broken. And that is on in 3504. So no pull request yet on that one, but as with all RTL issues, it's usually just a matter of applying the opposite RTL CSS to correct those sorts of problems.
Yeah, this one might be more complicated than that, though.
That wouldn't surprise me. That button drag and drop thing is a little.
Yeah.
It's elaborate. Let's see. Other items that we've got for the next bug fix release. We've promoted several items here to be discussed, but there's also the issue tracker that has a lot of them. Items of particular note that we would like to get addressed as soon as possible. This issue regarding security releases. Sometimes we have situations where a security release is put out for two versions of Backdrop, the previous version and the current version. But if you're using the previous version, that would be 1.11 right now, even if there's a security fix that fixes the problem and 1.11 is totally secure, the update module still pesters you saying you're insecure and you need to update to 1.12, which is not actually true. So the issue that we have here is we would like to make it so that Backdrop can better support having previous versions that are fully patched versions that are considered secure, even though they're not the latest feature version of Backdrop. So that issue is 3524, where we're having some discussions about making it so that update module is smarter, but we'll also need to provide more information in the update feeds from backdropcms.org so that update module can know if it's fully patched or not. So yeah, there's also, we've been discussing in the PMCQ how long backwards we should officially support security releases. By convention right now, we've been always patching the current release and the previous release. We're considering maybe making it go 2 releases backwards, so that would be 1 full year of coverage. But we have not actually reached conclusion on that point yet. So let's see, how long back is under discussion, but having support for running an older version that is fully patched is what this issue is about, which we need to support pretty much in any case. Let's see, we also have an issue if you had options element installed in 1.11 or earlier, and then you update to 1.12, we have some conflicting function names that currently cause fatals. There's a workaround. You can just delete the options element module out of your code base and then proceed to run update.php and everything is fine. But we'd like to make it so that you don't run into fatal errors. Like, it seems like that would be preferable. The solution we probably will follow there is those functions may need to be moved into something other than the dot module file so they can be loaded conditionally. Let's see. A long-standing issue, if you clone a layout, it breaks the new layout that was created, and it breaks the layout that you started from, apparently. That's issue 2673. There's a pull request filed there, but it needs a test to cover the use case. Similar thing, we have a pull request for this issue that if you create a node, upload a file to it, and then delete the file out from under Backdrop, that may cause a PDO exception. There's pull request filed for that one, which also needs tests. I posted a comment on how we can go about that in that issue. It shouldn't be very hard. Like, we even have similar tests already.
I have a question about our test process in general. I mean, this issue about layouts being broken has been broken for like more than 2-3 years, or something like that. It's like kind of a serious bug. I was wondering if we could adopt a process of, like, if we have a super serious bug and it has a fix, put the fix in and then put the test in later. rather than like saying, well, sorry, the software is broken because we don't have tests, even though we have like a working fix sitting around for it. Is there, and I know that like as a core developer, you're like, oh, well, I want everything to be tested, so we're not sure we're breaking it in the future, which makes sense. But I feel like because our philosophy is like, we don't really care about core developers, we care about the people who are dealing with the problem. Maybe we should change the way we handle the tests issue and have a different process around like a special label for needs test or something in the issue queue, so we can like get more fixed and then add tests like later as we have ability to do so.
I agree with that in the case that there are serious bugs that are being addressed.
Yeah, I think we might be able to make some exceptions if there were situations that were difficult to test. I don't think this actually qualifies as something that's difficult to test. There's dozens of tests already that cover layout functionality, and same with file functionality. And I think that, I mean, saying that this is for the benefit of core developers, it's not really for our benefit. It's to make it so that we don't accidentally break people's sites in the future by making a change. Like, it's for...
They're already broken now. Like, they're all broken now. Everybody's site is broken right now. If we fix it, they won't be. And I know that you're saying like, oh, it'll be better in the future. It's like, yeah, but it's already broken.
Yeah,
like, already...
from a practical perspective, people hate writing tests. And if we adopt this policy, like, nothing will have test coverage.
Well, not nothing, only like super serious issues, right? Like I think we should have some kind of qualifier that's like, how broken is the thing? Do we need to like, and you as a core developer would get to make that call on like reviewing the issues, you or Herb or Jeff or whoever. But I think that it would be good to not have this be our standard procedures, like everything needs a test. I think it would be something that would be like, okay, this is pretty serious. And I think we can leave if we could also have some process that would be like, if there's an issue that got in because it was serious and it needed a fix, like the follow-up issue for adding the test remains in the like next milestone indefinitely until it gets added. So it's something we would keep talking about. I think like maybe this isn't the best issue to like bring this up on, because it's kind of a gray area as to whether it's like that serious of bug. But I think just the discussion around like how we handle tests, we might need a separate scenario for what happens if we have something that's broken and been broken for a long time and we have a fix and we just don't have a test for it. Like what is our take on that, and is it going to be different from Drupal's?
Right. Well, if we can come up with some criteria, I mean, making criteria itself is even kind of difficult because it's kind of subjective as to like how bad the problem is or how hard the test is to write. And so, I mean, thus far we have basically been doing that it's kind of discretionary. Like, does this need tests or not? I remember like the most recent example was the downloading a module from GitHub/AWS was a problem with backdrop HTTP request. And there wasn't any reasonable way to test that functionality, and the break was pretty bad. And so I posted in that issue, I don't think there's any reasonable way to test this, so I'd like to include it. And that's what we did. And both of these have taken the opposite stance, saying test coverage is fairly trivial, we need tests on these. So
I don't think whether the test coverage is trivial or not should be part of the, like, deciding whether the fix should go in. I think it should be like, how bad is the issue? Like, how many people are we inconveniencing by requiring that like one developer write a trivial test or not?
I don't know. It's going to be really hard to sell me on write tests later. They're just not going to get written if we have that policy. Like, that's if these things have been held up.
But
like,
I still think that like a bug is worse than not having the test. Like, this bug is worse than not having a test for it. So we're saying we're going to limit the software because we don't have a test. Like, it just seems like the weight there of like what's important is silly. Like, I agree that like in general we should always have tests for everything, but like,
yeah, we agree that we're not going to make a habit out of this, and it's only going to be for major breakages. like for things that are really serious.
Which I think I'm actually
I think
on board
like,
with that idea, but I'm saying for both of these, from my perspective, these aren't bad enough to be exceptions.
okay, so I think a better fix for this would probably be remove the clone button if clone button breaks your site. Like that, we should do that first. And then later we can add the clone functionality if it's not going to break your site. But I think like leaving a broken feature in that we know is broken, that we have a fix for, is silly.
Yeah, I agree with that then.
I can get behind that as well.
Okay. So I think that would be my preference then, to be like, if we know this isn't going to work for anyone, we should remove the button, the shoot yourself in the foot button. It should be pulled out. And then when we get a fix and we get a test, we can put it back.
Right. Yeah, that's a better policy. If it's possible to remove the functionality that has the bug, it should be removed if it doesn't have test coverage and it's broken.
I think remove might even be hard, like disable.
Disable sounds better.
Would be better.
Yeah, with the note, linking over to the issue.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. That to do thing. Yeah, comment. Yeah.
Yep, I can get behind that policy for sure.
Because I think that like having it be broken is silly when we have a fix and when it's trivial to make it not even exist, right? In this case, just turn it off.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be fine with that.
I'm fine with that too. Not as fine as not having it be broken and having it exist, but more fine than having it be broken.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss further about like the difficulty of writing the test being criteria for whether or not it's required or not.
I totally agree with your, like, there's no way to test this, then obviously we shouldn't block that on an issue. But I also think like if it's much less likely that a test will ever get written if it's hard and we put the thing in without the test. But if the test is easy and we put the thing without the test, that makes it more likely that the test will get written rather than less likely.
Yeah, and both of the current cases, like layout tests are hard, but there's lots of examples to work from. The field test or the file upload test is actually both has working examples and isn't very difficult to test. So I think I don't know, both of these could be done if we put in the legwork, basically. Okay. Let's see. Should we discuss any further on that, or I think that's covered?
I think that's fine. I mean, I think maybe it would be good to create a PMC issue around like, maybe it's not necessary. Maybe it just like leave every issue up to core developers, but I don't know. We should have some way of like bringing them to your attention to be like, hey, this is a major issue. Let's have a decision on it, rather than having it to have to come here where it would be like some way to, I don't know, a new label or something to indicate that that one's needs some kind of conclusion.
Right. Speaking of labels and the way that we use them and just our general process. So we have this new label that we added for milestone candidate. Anything that we have that's like discretion about needs tests or not, like adding that label. Like we should document the process for actually filing an issue and getting it resolved, like what all of that goes through. Do we have something like that already? Maybe I'm just missing it. Like
about what all the labels mean?
Yeah, actually, like, I mean, maybe there's just an assumption here that we're using GitHub. And so how do you get something fixed in Backdrop is, well, it's GitHub. It's the same as most other things on GitHub. You file an issue and you file a pull request and then we review it. And then if we like it, we merge it, right? But, our process isn't quite that straightforward. There's all of these requirements for certain things that should be documented around, like, well, first of all, the fact that we have a separate issue queue from our pull request, and that there should be an issue for every pull request type thing. Every now and then we do get the random person that files a pull request without an issue, for example. Like, is there documentation saying that's not how we do things?
Yeah, we have developer documentation on backdropcms.org.
anyway, the policy of requiring tests or if tests are required, being at the discretion of core maintainers, if that becomes our policy, just a place where we should put that even before we make the final decision. Like, we should have a place to dump this information. I was worried about that with milestone candidates. Still seems to be an issue that we've kind of adopted a policy that's not written down anywhere.
I have an issue to write it down.
Oh, well, that's a start. Is that in the issue queue already?
It's in the backdropcms.org queue.
Oh.
And we have this page on backdropcms.org. It's /developers, which has submitting core pull requests as a subpage.
Oh, that seems like a start. Oh, this is like a how-to.
Yeah. And it includes every core pull request has to have an issue. But that, I think, might be the only place that's written. I think it might be good to have a designated issue queue page, core issue queue page, that talks about all the tags and the process for, like, when you have a pull request, add these labels, someone will review it. If it needs work, it'll get the labels changed back. If it's approved, it'll get marked RTPC, then it'll get a core committer review, and then it'll get merged or not.
Yeah. All of that, everything that you just described is not obvious, like normal GitHub behavior.
Yeah.
It's normal Drupal behavior, and it's actually normal, like, issue tracker behavior, Jira and what have you. But so I don't think people would be surprised by that, but still it'd be helpful to walk through the entire process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like a takeaway here. I think the API website seems like a fine place, like that. Actually, it's a little bit weird because the API site is so developer focused, and we wouldn't want to.
I kind of think I want to
exclusive
in this developer notes section on backdropcms.org. Where we have the, like, submitting a core pull request thing. I think that might be a good place for how to use the issue queue. We could also...
it is on backdropcms.org. I'm sorry, I thought this was on the API website.
No.
Great.
We could also link it, like cross-link from the API site. We could put a, like, how to use the issue queue thing there that points to this site, and then that way people could find it if they were on there.
Yep. Yeah, even just making an issue, how to use the issue queue might be fine. Or if you wanted to, because all of these other ones are kind of action driven, upgrading, moving, submitting. We could do submitting core issues, and then just have them be separate things, And so instead of the submitting core pull request having this little note at the top, instead of saying that we need a corresponding issue, we could just link over to the issue, submitting a core issue page.
Okay.
And then we should link to both of these things from the README.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Okay, super. That's a plan. Okay. Let's see. Got a little derailed on those two issues. We've got one last one that is a CSS issue that the contextual link for views sometimes is inaccessible. You can't actually get your cursor over it. It's issue 2690. This one in particular is related to the admin toolbar that's sometimes it just covers up the contextual link cogwheel. And so it's in discussion there as to how we can correct that. I don't think that we've reached kind of a conclusion really of even what the problem space is, other than we can't get to the contextual link. So that issue is in discussion with various ideas being tossed about trying to figure out how we can correct that. We've also got a lot of other issues that are in the 112.3 milestone. Looks like there are about 30 of them that you can check out by checking out the 112.3 milestone on GitHub. Okay, let's move on to 113. 113 is the next release of Backdrop, next minor release of Backdrop that includes new features. It will be coming out May 15th, 2019. Thus far, I don't think 113 actually contains much of any changes from 112 yet, but we have some issues that we'd like to push forward during this release that we can go over. This one we've added back onto the agenda, telemetry. Let me get the issue number here. It,
285.
Yeah, how about that? So issue number, it's been open for a while. The idea here is we would like to start collecting anonymous information about the configuration of people's Backdrop sites and then aggregating them on backdropcms.org. The most obvious one that everybody, that we would like to collect is something like, which version of PHP are you running? That would be really useful to help inform decisions about how far backwards we need to support versions of PHP, for example. So right now, telemetry, like sending information to backdropcms.org is tied to updates. So when you check for updates, you send to backdropcms.org information about what modules you're running, and then backdropcms.org aggregates that information and makes that publicly available. And right now, sending information to backdropcms.org about what versions of modules you're running and getting a list of modules, like getting the updates in the first place, are tied together. And we'd like to decouple those so that you can check for updates while remaining completely anonymous about how your site is configured, but opt in to sending not just the versions of modules that you're running, but also other information like what version of PHP you're running and other data that we have suggested we collect there. Do you want to hop in, Gregory? I think you...
Yeah, so basically where the issue stands is that we have a lot of ideas of how it would be implemented and how this could be presented to the user. Most of the discussion was around, as you said, the bit of the installer module where it asks for consent to check for updates. And yes, as you said, we shouldn't, when people opt out of taking, they might opt out of checking for updates because of the fact that they don't want to send data. So we should just allow them to decide for one or the other independently. And then other things that we could gather data for is like certain settings for modules, which modules in core are enabled or not, so we can decide on trends with regards to what would be enabled by default when someone installs Backdrop. So the main point is a better user experience out of the box.
Yeah,
and it will help us make decisions in matters where we do not have solid data with regards on what most people prefer or what they do.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in the issue as well, that the check for updates checkbox, like once we separate out, like send anonymous information to backdropcms.org, if we separate those two, checking for updates shouldn't even be a question. It should just always be on, because that's just ridiculous. Of course you want to check for updates. Maybe you just want to do it anonymously.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. So the question is, where do we start implementation here? It is going to require, some place to send the data, backdropcms.org, as well as, building the place that actually collects all the information and then sends it. And so I think the most natural thing for this would be, of course, a separate module, that you can feel confident turning off the entire module, and the checkbox on during the installer just determines whether or not the module gets turned on or not. So
it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, we could even, we could even write the entire thing, the entire module, without it actually sending data anywhere. Like, we could go ahead and start the entire process of saying, here's the module, here's it collecting all of the data, here's the checkbox on the installer page. We could do all of those things, and just where it actually sends the data, we could then just have that be a mock for now. Just like, it wouldn't actually send it. It might like print to the messages area and say, I sent this, here is where I will send this message, which actually maybe the messages area isn't the right place. Like Watchdog might be better because it'll probably be done on cron shops, for example.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't think there's any reason for us to delay the part that is most accessible to developers, which is writing the module code. Once we have an idea of the kind of data we need to send, then we can build the receiving end on backdropcms.org. And again, like, that receiving end could also be built just entirely separately as another module. And then the actual deployment process would be, well, now we have to put that module on backdropcms.org.
and then decide how to display that data so that it's accessible by people, because it will be crucial for decision making during certain issues.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And the receiving end is a little bit more nebulous, kind of like the update feed is. The update feed provided by project module on backdropcms.org is a module, but it's got a lot of special situations going on there. Like, it has a funny cache layer on it, and it has a separate domain, updates.backdropcms.org, that is then does some fancy stuff to make it so that we could potentially separate that out at some point. But for now, it's all just from backdropcms.org. So the receiving end could get a little complicated because we'll want to make it so that receiving end could be switched out for something else at some point in the future without updating every backdrop install that's out there. So it'll end up looking something similar to update module. That's, I think.
Now that we're talking about it, I thought that maybe this could not even be part of the installer. See how we have this issue about making the 2-minute installer or the very simplified one? One thing would be that the checkbox can go away because automatic checking for updates would be happening anyways, because that's anonymous. And what we can do is we can have a one-time message showing up saying, this is how most software does it. Hey, do you feel like helping us collect data? And that will be a one-off. Decide yes, no, and that's after installation. Once the person has, jumped into the site. So we get rid of the entire checkbox from the installer.
Interesting. So are you suggesting that we would leave it on by default, or we'd leave it off by default?
Off by default and have people opt in.
Interesting.
It's less intrusive. We get it out of the installer, so the installer finishes quickly, and people can just ignore it. It will just be a message that shows after the installation is finished.
Yeah, interesting. It does make it less likely that we would get information that way.
Yes, but although that's not the point, we should respect the people that do not want to send any information.
Yeah. Yeah, let's discuss further in the issue queue. I'd have to think about that. I actually also have to think about whether or not usage tracking should be fully removed from update module as well. Like, right now, when you check for updates, you're being counted as an installation, as like an installation of web form module or an installation of backdrop 1.12.1 or what have you.
Sure, I understand it will be a difficult decision, but I think it would be the right thing to do from a privacy or, I don't know. These things should be opt-in in general. just
Yeah.
from an ethical standpoint.
Yeah, from a statistics standpoint, like it'd be really valuable to know like how many backdrop sites there are. And right now, that's the canonical source of like we think that there are this many backdrop sites out there, you know, and we compare that directly basically to Drupal's numbers. If we were to not collect that information from a public perception standpoint, like we wouldn't have any way of knowing how many backdrop sites there are, or we'd have a lot lower numbers than we would otherwise because it wouldn't be, nothing would be tracked by default.
Yeah.
Which saying all of that, I'm realizing I think you're right. That you're like from an ethical standpoint, we shouldn't be counting anybody by default. But I think we could compromise on that and have it be like show the option for if we leave it in the installer as it is, like I don't have any ethical problems with that. Like it's already, or I don't think there are any ethical problems with that. It's already there. It's not turned on unless you read through it. But right now the checkbox is checked by default for check for updates, and it would be the same sort of thing. Like we might need to argue about whether or not that should be checked by default or not.
Yeah, let's discuss on that issue.
Yep. That's what I meant. I didn't mean argue. I meant discuss. Okay, let's move on. I think our path forward on telemetry, like we can proceed forward pretty clearly here. Like an implementation, like let's start. Let's make a new module. Propose it as a candidate for core. Probably, I would think that it could be submitted just as a pull request directly, but I mean, this could even be written as a contrib module first. There's no reason why not. I don't know. I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other on that, though.
Yep.
Whichever way is easiest to implement. Yeah, speaking of things that could be done directly as a core pull request or not, let's transition to the next issue, which is dashboard. Dashboard is issue 495, and this one has a pull request that adds a new dashboard module to Backdrop Core. Let's see. I put in the agenda, Jen, that I was hoping you could cover this one.
Sure. So let's see, where we are on dashboard is that we have a working version, but it probably needs some cleanup for core inclusion. But since it didn't make 112, Doc Wilmot's sort of reimagining the whole problem space, and he said he wants to come up with some more blocks that are a little bit more informational rather than utility focused. So like more statistics and less, here are all the links you need to do stuff. I think those blocks will be great, but I did add some feedback in the issue that the module these were, this dashboard was adapted from was one I wrote for Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 called Total Control. And the block that he thought was most redundant was actually the most used block in the Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 versions. So it might be good to, before we decide what the default layout is, just take a look at all the blocks that are provided and see, do we need all of them turned on by default, or should we just provide them there as options for people to use? So it would be great if we could get more people just giving it a test and seeing if all of the things they expect to be there on a dashboard are there, or is there anything major missing? And for the stuff that is there, does it work how you would expect it to work? Or do you want more information or less information, or more links or less links, or just kind of feedback in general on how this is working for Backdrop?
Having said all that, there was a consensus, I think, on that, or on that if it's ready as a module, we should include it with 113, and additional blocks or changes to the existing blocks and what is default or not can come up at later versions.
Yeah.
As in, it's an exciting feature to have. It's much better than redirecting people to the user edit page, the profile edit page when they log in.
Or the user view page, which is even worse.
Yeah. So let's get it in for 113 if it's in a state that can get in, and any additional ideas or thoughts of improving can come at a later points, even bug fix releases.
Yeah, sounds great.
So that's at least one thing that is getting in for 113.
Great. Anything else?
That's it.
All right. Let's see. Other issues. These are things that have been in progress. The last two things have been in progress for a little while yet, kind of continuing to iterate on functionality that's already in core. In 111, sorry, in 112, we added core functionality for config translation, but it's not applied to all of the core files yet. And so issue 3455 is starting to apply the pattern of using the new APIs and adding information about what strings are translatable into config files. And so there's a pull request there that needs review that adds site settings, including site name and the label for anonymous users. I've started doing a code review on that, though more eyeballs would be helpful there. Herbdool is the one who carried the configuration translation torch to the finish line for 112. And so now he's going through the core files and using this new set of APIs. I think that he's done a very good thing here by starting with the most obvious things like site name, where it's a simple example and it's also one that is used in a lot of different places. Once this pull request gets to a workable state and is merged, it will kind of establish the pattern that then needs to be applied throughout the rest of core. I don't think that these are going to be very technically challenging things for people to implement. They just need a template from which they can base this pattern, and then we'll just apply it everywhere throughout all of core, and eventually we would encourage that to be applied through all of contrib as well. It's possible that once these patterns are established, that we can also do things like add some new rules to like the coder upgrade module to help people upgrade from Drupal 7 to Backdrop, to make it so that if you're wrapping T around a variable, we would say, hey, you might want to check out config translation instead, because using config translation makes it so that we can extract those strings with the POTX module. The POTX module, which was released this week, but doesn't yet actually include this ability for extraction yet. So we have some work all around to do, but it is very good that things are moving forward for translatable config. I always feel like I have to put a little asterisk whenever I say translatable config. Our config is already translatable, but this facilitates finding the strings. So yeah, anyway, facilitating that, I'm glad to see that moving forward. Let's see. And the last item that we've got for 113 pulled out to talk about during this meeting is package signing, issue 1992. Still in proof of concept. John Franklin filed an excellent pull request that provides an example of how we could do package signing using OpenSSL, I think. And so I haven't had a chance to review that. Any other eyeballs that are out there that are interested in making it so that we can validate packages when they get downloaded to ensure that they were signed by backdropcms.org. That's what that issue is about. Further thought on that would be helpful. There's also the 113 issue tracker. Check out the 113 milestone. There's lots of issues in there that we've got slated for 113, some big, some small. But those 4 items are all that we've got slated for the agenda. So that's all I've got. So general discussion, Jen, are these items that we have in the agenda up for discussion?
We talked about these last week.
Yeah, let's not recap them. I think.
Okay. Just so you guys know, I did just go through the issue queue and I updated the telemetry meta issue with links to all of the sub issues that were tagged with needs usage metrics so that we can see why we needed the information that's outlined in that ticket. And I think going forward, anytime we have an issue that needs usage metrics, it would be good to make sure that that data is outlined here. But at least that'll give us a good starting point for the why we wanted the things that were in that list. I added a few things while I was on there too. So.
there's one issue that was mentioned during the previous meeting. I couldn't find the ticket, the issue number before. I found it now. That I would like to propose for 113, and that's 3332. So basically, the proposal there is to create a new form API type of permissions, which would allow people to just enter an array of permissions, and then what that does is it renders an array of users. Sorry, a table of users and permissions, and you can embed that in any form. So we started adding such forms almost everywhere that they're needed, like the contact module, and it could
contact module, filter module, node. There's a bunch of stuff that has them now. And when we did contact module, Opie pointed out that that we were like pulling in CSS and stuff from node modules implementation. But Gregory was thinking it would be great if we could make this a standalone form API element that you could just implement in your module, and it would automatically attach all of the assets that were necessary and render it appropriately for the site that you were on. So we're not redoing it from scratch every time. If we have more components like this that are more developer friendly for implementing in their own modules, we're going to end up with a much better contrib space, because it would be like, oh, you can just add permissions by calling this function and giving it the permissions to the module, which I think is a fantastic idea. I think we talked about it in the design meeting too. I don't know, Nate, how hard adding a new form API, what are they called? Form element?
Yeah, an element, yeah.
Yeah, is going to be. But we have a couple pretty good use cases in core where we could implement it and make sure it's working.
It will improve DX basically, but if developers start using it for their module settings, and the less, I'm not saying that we will completely eliminate the need of visiting the huge page of permissions, but the less people visit it, because it's like the permission page is been a pain point in Drupal like since forever, and it keeps growing bigger and bigger. And I know we're not going to be able to get rid of it, but if we can eliminate the need of people having to visit it every time they need to do something, like that would be great. So eventually, I think it's a DX win, but eventually I think it will bring a lot of UX.
Yeah. Yeah, making this simpler would definitely be good. And I'm looking at one of the examples where we added it to contact module, which actually isn't a tremendous amount of code. Like, I mean, it's harder than it should be probably, or harder than it could be. But what really makes me uncomfortable here is that there's odd leakage into like user modules like JavaScript and user modules theme functions. Like it's coupled in a way that is likely to break, because it is making it so that every place that we need this permissions form is doing a lot of the same work, that it has the exact same assumptions built into it. So if we were to ever do something to modify like the JavaScript file, we'd have to change it in like 6 places, which I don't like. Plus any contrib module would just be busted if they tried to do this same thing. So I think it's a great idea. Like, we should consolidate this to make it all come from one single place. We might not need to do a form API element. It might be too much. I don't know. We could make it just a function that, made the table that took these 3 arguments as well, and then just did all of the work of assembling the necessary parts of the form. But I don't know. The thing that makes me a little bit hesitant about elements is that this is not a generic like form element. It's not like what form API is made for, in terms of like, oh, well, I want a better file field upload, or I want like an options element is a good example, where that sort of thing is a reusable thing for inputting data.
What about just a theme function?
Right. Well, I mean,
because then you could do like pound theme, and it would be more complete than, building your own table and assembling your own data. You could still pass it in the things you need. Like, here are my permissions. go, and then it would build the table and add the assets and all of that. Would that be?
Right, yeah. Which is, it's kind of similar, like we had a pull request recently that Joseph filed for the color module, that when a theme wants to provide color fields, like there's a function that says like add the color field to my form. And then you get to assign where in the form it lives. And so that's like a compromise, that it has the code reuse of having it all be centrally managed by one place without making it be a form API element that is accessible anywhere. I'm just thinking like I think form API should basically be reserved for generic data input. Like they should be like advanced HTML elements, or maybe not advanced HTML elements, that could be used for not backdrop specific purposes. Like it is
config editor dialog, right, where you use the file upload element, but that puts the file into the text area.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so the permissions form API element would be not useful outside of backdrop. You would never put it on the front end of your website, for example. But other form API elements, you might use them for other purposes, like searching and for filling out registration forms and things like that.
Yep, I could go either way. If not, maybe I can rename that the title of that issue to provide a generic an easier way to render permission matrices or something like that. Yeah. So do you guys think that it's worthy for like to try to get it in something like that for 113?
So I have a question. How would something like that work for like saving the form and saving the permissions appropriately? Because if you had a theme function that just rendered,
yeah, that's the point. That
checkboxes.
Currently, it's too much work because it's not only rendering the table itself, but you have to also add a specific validate form submit, like validation function.
Yeah.
So what caught my eye is that I was trying to repeat the same code, sort of like that OP used, so that it's reusable and it doesn't cause confusion each time that another developer tries to do the same thing, sort of like consistency in mind. And I noticed that there were I was repeating the same patterns over and over, and that's why I thought that this should be easier. Like all I need to do is like feed the permissions to something, like if it was a form API as a property, or if it was a function as variables in an array.
I think there's a pattern for this already. I just don't know what it is. Is it like in form API, is there a way you can add like a special render or something for an individual element? So like if you had a markup element or something, there's some way you could have it build form elements inside. Like I feel like there's something there that would do this, that you could still add like the pound attach to get your assets and the pound validate and like special submit handling or whatever you need in sort of the same way that you can add a theme function by doing pound theme, but it wouldn't just render it, it adds all the other stuff too.
Yeah, you can do validation, but form elements don't have any way of saving themselves. Like that's always left to the submit handler to deal with the saving.
Okay. So I think maybe just some helper functions. Gregory could do this too, where like if you have a helper function that you can pass in all of your strings for user roles or permissions or whatever they are, the helper function could build all of the stuff around it. And then you could have a second helper function that matches, that handles the saving of these permissions, where you could pass in the entire form values array and the names of the permissions, the permissions, and then it would loop through them, locate them in whatever structure matched the builder structure and save them appropriately. So it's not quite as clean as having like a form API element that would do it, but I think we can still sort of provide the same utility, like developer assistance functions
Still the checkboxes, like when you actually put those, the checkboxes are fields themselves.
Yeah.
So you would still need a form element.
Submit handler, or
so are you saying that we add a form element and then we pass some sort of function through? Like, I'm not sure. Like when you build a form, you just add form elements. So even now that the way that this is done is like you have a form checkbox permissions or something like that, and it just.
Yeah, so you could have a function that would be like backdrop build permissions matrix or something like that. And then you could pass it your array of permissions and like your form ID or I don't know, whatever it was. And it would return to you a rendered table with all of the checkboxes in it in the way that you would expect. And then you could just say, you know, form element, whatever it is, equals, call that function. And now it's built your parent element, and within that parent element, it has all of the checkboxes and wherever they want. And then you could have in your submit function, you could add, or your validate, wherever you needed it, you could add another function that would be like, you know, backdrop process permissions matrix or whatever it is. And it would search through the form tree for the exact pattern of the thing that it built earlier, find all of the permissions and save them all appropriately, and then return to you at the end. So I think we can sort of build the utility, but it's not going to be as clean.
Okay.
It's still possible.
I could give it a go, but I have the feeling, I like the way that you have confidence in me, but I think it's going to get out of depth.
Okay, well, I'm happy to review it at any point, even if it's not in a working order and you're like, what the hell is going on? Do I do it like this? I look at it and be like, okay, yeah, that's, you know, you're almost there. So I'm happy to, there we go.
Cool. Okay, yep, good compromise. Should I add the milestone for that issue? Do you think that it's worthy for the 113 to give it a go? Or?
Add the milestone candidate label and I'll add the milestone.
Okay, cool.
Just so we're following our own orders.
And then I know that we have exceeded the time, but then we started a little bit later. Just something related to telemetry. This is sort of like an idea, but I'm not sure how you guys feel about it. Would config files per user for specific settings, as in which checkboxes or which field sets are open or closed or stuff like that, or how the admin menu is configured, be something? So if you have a lot of admins, maybe they prefer the admin menu. For example, this is a use case. Some of them prefer the admin bar to be sticky. Some of them don't. But now we currently have a system-wide setting, and the single site admin that decides what to set it to. Then the rest of the site users have that. So I was thinking that maybe we can have some sort of per user settings that could be stored in config that can remember settings per user. Like, you know, I prefer the is that like something that would go, that would be a good fit for config, like have specific sort of like settings.username.something JSON file?
Yeah, or you could use a user ID because people can change their usernames.
Fair enough, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So just in general, so anything that has has an ID, especially an auto increment ID, like a user, we would generally consider it to be content, something that lives in the database, because it's not guaranteed to be the same user across different environments. So a config file for like user ID 10, for example, wouldn't be safe to move across environments because user ID 10 might be different on the dev environment than it is on the production environment. So you'd start changing config for not necessarily the same person.
So if you had like a version of UUID module for Backdrop, would that be safer? And then you could have config files that use a UUID.
I don't think putting config files for any kind of content I don't think config files for any kind of unique ID is something that we should pursue, just because you could have like potentially hundreds of thousands of users that shouldn't be managed through config files. It should just be a part of their user profile, you know, like in the database. So a field or property that's like, you know, on the user profile form saying, you know, administrative options or something like that, where they check or uncheck something, and then it should just be stored with the rest of the user information in the database, probably.
So you think? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
There's the data in the database. There's a column called data that's just like a serialized array of any value you want to attach to a user. And I don't really see it used very often, but like you can just put whatever you want in it.
Yeah, I think I tried to remove that at some point, but I couldn't because it was used by some weird obscure systems or something like that.
I think it was like the user's signature.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah. I think you might be right. It might be signature. Yeah.
But it would be a way that we could store per user configuration like that without having to add a bunch of new database tables or new columns to tables.
Yeah.
So because there's many things to be added there, how would I go about adding it? Would it be in a JSON format or an array of?
Depends on how you're going to use it on the way out. Like for something like an admin menu setting, that's tough because you'd have to override but where it's implemented, right? In admin menu somewhere when the menu's rendering, you'd have to say, oh, hey, you know, ignore that thing you just pulled from config and instead go get it from this user's data column.
Yeah. Right. Well, in this particular example, if this were a module that's like per user admin bar or something like that, or even just if it were built directly into admin bar, if you add the same setting again later, it would overwrite the previous one, like through Drupal backdrop add JS, you know, to add the setting to the page. So you could just modify it on the way out to the front end.
Yeah, it could be for other things, like the admin menu thing was sort of like the first use case that came to mind. But we have certain field sets in the admin user interface that are by default collapsed, but people might frequently need to change the things that are within them, so they have to like constantly visit that page, expand that, check the setting, do something, submit the form. Whereas if the status, the collapsed or expanded status of specific, for example, field sets could be remembered across sessions, stuff like that, but per user though.
You could also use the variables table.
No, not for something that's per user, and the whole thing is deprecated. Don't do that. Don't even suggest that.
We touched the soft spot there. Okay, sure. Anyways, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna probably file a ticket for it, and let's discuss further. It was just an idea that I had. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Let's leave it to the issue queue. Okay. Let's call it a meeting. We're way over time.
Yep.
Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you everybody out there for watching. We're still moving along on lots of things. Keep on backdropping. So thanks everybody.
Hey, bye.
Bye.